Welcome, friends, to Wicked Wednesdays, a time of fright and horror. Settle in now, for I have a true spooky story I experienced several years ago to share with you all tonight. This one goes out to all the medical workers listening in. So gather round and listen well to The Third Roommate. For a while, I worked as a direct support professional. Since that term is likely to be unfamiliar to most people outside of the field, I basically took care of developmentally disabled adults and helped them around in their home and community. Needs varied from person to person, so I had to stay on my toes. I was stationed at one house for around a month to get me properly trained. Normally, training was completed in a much shorter amount of time, but since the actual nursing staff was being phased out, some of the clients that needed medical staff on call were about to be transferred to larger support facilities. One of my clients would be leaving to go with her nurse to her new home at the end of the month, and the other client was going to a residence closer to her other family members, so my boss saw no need in moving me right in the middle of relocation chaos. Most of the staff that worked in the house were pretty great, and since the nurse mostly took care of that one client and the other didn't need much help, it was pretty quiet most of the time. I wasn't yet certified to administer medications, so I mostly just cooked, cleaned, and helped one of the clients exercise. During downtimes, I usually sat on a sofa arm, going over creepypasta stories I read on the old channel, while the clients watched TV. All in all, it was a good way to ease someone into that job. However, as quiet as it was, there was something that broke the tranquility every now and then that made me question what was going on in that house. For reference, both of these ladies were nonverbal, so neither of them could talk to me nor to each other. In addition, one was very low-functioning enough that she didn't notice when we were next to her unless we were very close or she felt lonely, and had the motor skills of a toddler, so she never walked very far without assistance. This meant she could go hours either watching TV or staring off into space, dreaming whatever daydream she spent her entire life in. The other lady was a bit more mischievous, but she adored plopping down next to someone and listening to them tell her a story, or have them dance around her while she was doing her exercises, so she was usually doing one of those things when not watching TV. However, there were times during the day, usually about 3:30 in the afternoon, that they would both stop what they were doing and suddenly turn and look across the little house toward the bedrooms. Then, slowly, they would turn their eyes and heads as if they were watching something walk across the house and down the hall toward the door at the end of it. A door we seldom opened, but was once the preferred route to enter and leave the house. The one lady, who had very little mobility, would literally turn around in her big lounge chair and crane her neck as she watched this invisible thing get close, before turning her whole body around to watch it again. There were more than once she looked like she might tumble out of her chair in her uncharacteristic excitement, so I'd have to call the nurse to help her. After noticing this unusual synchronized stare from these two ladies, I realized that no one else seemed to notice. Mostly because I would be the only one in the room at this point, while someone else was either doing the laundry or going out for a smoke. The strangest thing is both would be very quiet and serious during this whole event, but after their eyes met the door for a few moments, the spell over them would break, and they would go back to how they normally were, one giddy and laughing, and the other wistfully gazing at whatever she had been looking at before. After the third instance of this, I started to wonder if they had their own nonverbal language and began asking questions of the nurse. The response I got was the one barely paid attention to the other, and the energetic lady seemed to be content to let her roommate go unperturbed. I chalked it up as some strange coincidence, until one night, a few weeks later. The nurse had gone to help her client get ready for bed. Mine had already been out like a light in her own room for a good half hour, and could sleep through a hurricane, so I felt like it was okay to get what little cleaning remained done. The lights in the living room were on, but the ones in the kitchen and the hall leading to the unused door were off. I didn't need them because there was enough light in the living room to see to do the dishes. As I was finishing up, I noticed out of the corner of my eye someone walk out of the hall and into the kitchen, going straight behind me. I figured the nurse had come to pick up something she left on the counter, but when I turned around, no one was there. In fact, the person I saw had been walking so adamantly that I half expected to hear a clang as they walked into the oven, because there was very little room left behind me before the floor hit the stove. Blinking, I realized that didn't quite look like the nurse. No, this nurse was a little bit taller than me, very slim, and had blonde hair. Who I had seen walk behind me was shorter, squatter, and had thick black hair. The stranger also had on what looked to be a yellow and red sweater. The nurse had been wearing baby pink scrubs her whole shift. Even though nobody could move fast enough for me to not notice them leave the kitchen, I figured that maybe, just maybe, the nurse had changed clothes, and it wasn't black hair that I saw, but a hat or something. I was going to rule out the only bit of logic I had left. Sure enough, the nurse hadn't left the client's room since I last saw her. I found her looking over the client's daily paperwork and making little notes for the morning staff. Still, a hatless blonde in scrubs. Of course, I asked her if she'd changed clothes and stuck up on me. She, of course, looked at me like I was nuts and asked me if I was getting too tired. I wasn't. I had an energy drink only an hour before and was still wide awake. I just looked around the house before plopping down on the couch, completely assured that whatever the clients had been watching had decided to show itself to me. Nothing else weird happened besides the clients occasionally doing their 3:30 vigil. This continued up until the week they moved. As I was helping to pack up my clients' things, I noticed a picture was sticking out from behind the dresser. Thinking it might have fallen behind there by accident, I pulled it out and was floored. The image of a stocky woman with black hair smiled back at me. About that time, the nurse walked in with more packing tape. I turned to her, excited, and asked who the woman was. She looked at the picture and smiled fondly. That was Alice. The nurse went on to tell me that Alice had been her former client. While she had tragically succumbed to medical issues stemming from several congenital problems, she had lived long past the time the doctors gave her, and had been very fond of my client, protective even. I asked the nurse how tall the woman had been. Since she had issues that prevented her from ever standing and walking as straight as most people, Alice had been quite short. However, if she hadn't had the issue she did, the nurse guessed the woman would have come up to a few inches below my own height. Exactly the height of the stranger that I had seen. Well, my friends, did you enjoy this story? I do still think about those ladies from time to time, and I hope they're doing well in their new homes. If you like this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Check out my Patreon if you're feeling generous at patreon.com/Phantasmal Poppy. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to come back Saturday for another true spooky story. Good night, and see you all real soon.